Hello and welcome to 100 Days. North Korea is fast becoming the Trump administration's most urgent foreign policy challenge.
How is the United States going to respond to the threat, and what will the president tell the senators, who are all invited to the White House tomorrow?
A missile-armed American submarine has just arrived in South Korea as the North marks a military anniversary with live fire. Tensions closer to home as well. President Trump still wants to build a wall along the southern border. The Mexican economy minister tells us they won't pay for it.
If they decide to do it, it's in their own sovereign right. The only thing that is clear is that there is no way Mexico is going to pay for it.
But will that wall shut down the US government? Congress is back in town and can't even agree on staying open for business.
Also, France is getting ready for round 2 of the presidential election, but today both candidates suspended the intense focus on that campaign to honour the 37-year-old police officer shot dead in Paris on Thursday. And Ivanka Trump heads to Berlin to defend her father's record on women's rights, though not everyone in the audience was convinced.
I'm Katty Kay in Washington. Christian Fraser is back in London. A US nuclear submarine pulled into a South Korean port today. A US aircraft carrier arrives there soon. And tomorrow, all 100 US senators have been invited to the White House for a very unusual, secure briefing on the crisis. Is the North Korea situation at a tipping point, or is this political theatre from the White House?
Earlier today, Pyongyang carried out a major live-fire military exercise to mark the 85th anniversary of the founding of its armed forces. It's thought to be planning a 6th nuclear test. Mr. Trump says it's time to take off the blindfolds and solve the problem.
According to the New York Times today, here's what the Trump administration may be looking at. A growing body of expert studies and classified intelligence reports that conclude the country is capable of producing a nuclear bomb every 6 or 7 weeks. Well, for more on this, I spoke earlier to the former American ambassador to the United Nations, Bill Richardson. Governor Richardson, how urgent do you think the North Korean situation is at the moment? Has it become more so just recently?
It's become more urgent recently because the possibility of a tinderbox conflagration has increased, because now the skirmishes may be, hopefully not, between North Korea and South Korea with artillery shells, with conventional weapons. I recall years ago there was a brush up because a North Korean vessel shot a South Korean vessel, a fishing boat. This is the danger of conventional miscalculations, of a conventional mistake.
OK, add into that the prospect of an accelerated nuclear program. Do you think Mr. Trump can do what he says? Do you think he can solve the North Korean issue?
Well, it remains to be seen. First, the U.S. needs to develop an overall strategy. I don't think they have one. Secondly, they have to speak with one voice. You've got too many cabinet members saying different things. Third, I think there's got to be an injection of diplomacy into this, a diplomatic deal of some kind. We don't have that. And fourth, I think we have to let China find a way to put significant pressure on North Korea, which they haven't done in the past. Give them a little time to squeeze North Korea and see if it works. I don't know if it'll work, but if they put more sanctions on China, coal exports, oil export reductions, that might help.
Right, that seems to be part of the Trump administration strategy, and it's what he says he told Mr. Xi. Listen, Chinese entities have got to enforce these sanctions or we will take action against those Chinese entities. But the truth is, as you know, China's interests on North Korea are not exactly the same as the United States, and at some point that could diverge, couldn't it?
That's right. And this is why I do believe giving China some incentives. It seems President Trump is doing that, not naming them currency manipulators, maybe some trade benefits, maybe some other cooperation we don't know about. Incentivize China to help us, because you're right, in the past they haven't helped us. They like the turmoil in the Korean Peninsula because it causes problems for the United States. They don't want North and South Korea unification. They don't want them getting together. They like the turmoil, but maybe they're changing because Kim Jong-un, with all these threats and weapons and ballistic missiles, conventional warfare, maybe 20 nuclear weapons, the region is very unstable.
The opinion of scientists far more informed about nuclear matters than I am seems to be that somewhere around 2020, North Korea could resolve the issue of how to get a missile that goes as far as the United States and how to get a warhead that survives that journey. They could solve that problem. That would be under Mr. Trump's watch. Is this the big foreign policy challenge for the new president?
This is the biggest foreign policy challenge for the new president, more than Syria, more than the Middle East, more than Canada and Mexico. It seems that's kind of falling apart too, the relationship. But I think this involves China, one of our biggest competitors, geopolitical, I wouldn't call them friends, but geopolitical challenges. And then North Korea with nuclear weapons, going after our friends in Japan and South Korea with 30,000 American troops in South Korea, 50,000 American troops in Japan. So this is a brush fire that could happen with a little miscalculation. This is why we have to be very careful. I want the Trump administration policy to work, but I think they should cool down the rhetoric, cool down, oh, let's have a preemptive military strike as on the table. Don't say that. Just say all options are on the table, because I've negotiated with the North Koreans. They're unpredictable. It's a cult of personality. They don't react the way we do. They don't negotiate the way we do. You put their back against the wall, they may do something stupid.
Okay, Bill Richardson, thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's really interesting, isn't it? Bill Richardson, not the only person that I've heard saying that the president is painting himself into a corner, Cathy, with some of the rhetoric that he's using. But what do you think is going on tomorrow? The fact that he's inviting all 100 senators to the White House, that's pretty symbolic. Why wouldn't he just go to the Senate himself?
Yeah, it's not just symbolic. It's almost unprecedented. I've lived here for 20 years, Christian. I've never seen something like this. A president inviting the entire Senate to the White House for a security briefing that they could, as you say, have in the Senate as well. They have secure facilities in the Senate for exactly this kind of purpose. And I think this is what's leading some observers here in Washington to question about whether that is an element of, TV performance, that the sight of all of these senators trooping into the White House will, of course, be filmed. It will be on television, and it adds to this sense of urgency surrounding the crisis. They won't be able to get any different information in the White House than they would be able to get in the Senate, where it would usually happen. The issue still is, what does the president do to solve this, as he has now said he wants to do? Because the military side has all of the same perils that it's had forever. A strike against the North Koreans, as Bill Richardson was suggesting, is still something that's very difficult. And putting pressure on the Chinese is something that's been tried before and hasn't been terribly successful either. So it'll be interesting to see whether the president, with this new pressure coming out, this heightened tension coming out of the North, manages to come up with different solutions. Let's move on. Donald Trump is denying that he has changed his policy on building a controversial border wall between the United States and Mexico. Last night, he suggested that the demand for initial funding of the wall could be pushed back to September so that Congress can avoid a government shutdown.
But in a tweet earlier today, this is what the US president said: "Don't let the fake media tell you that I've changed my position on the wall. It will get built and help stop drugs, human trafficking, etc." Well, Congress might pay the initial upfront costs, but the president is insisting that eventually Mexico will foot the bill. Today I sat down with Mexico's Secretary of the Economy, Ildefonso Guajardo, who is here in the UK to talk about a post-Brexit trade deal. But I began by asking him about the NAFTA free trade agreement between Mexico, the US and Canada. Donald Trump has now imposed tariffs on Canadian lumber. Would he do the same to Mexico's car industry?
To start with, you have to remember that today's trade between the US, Mexico and Canada is obviously regulated by NAFTA. So what you are looking at is day-to-day issues that we have to face. Lumber is not the result of a review of NAFTA. It's a result of a long-term dispute that has been persistent in the US-Canada process. Having a trade agreement doesn't mean that you will not have trade disputes. The only thing is that you have a framework how to solve your disputes. Today probably you have learned that in WTO there have been a ruling favoring Mexico in a tuna dispute with the US.
What happens if tariffs are imposed on some of your exports to the United States?
We have been very clear, basically saying that we are willing to improve NAFTA, to renegotiate NAFTA, but with a view to really create value. we will not reimpose tariffs, and we will not consider trade management techniques like quotas in trade. To start with, the order to construct a new vision for NAFTA is not to think about tariffs or quotas.
Complicating the relationship, of course, is the wall. He's been tweeting about it again today. If a border tax is brought in to pay for it, or visa fees are raised, what would the repercussions be?
The wall has been there from the beginning in terms of a decision that the new president is making. And as long as they do it in their territory, with their own financial sources, it's their own sovereign decision to do it. We don't like it. We do not believe that walls are a solution for issues. There are better ways to handle things. But if they decide to do it, it's in their own sovereign right. The only thing that is clear is that there is no way Mexico is going to pay for it. If you think, for instance, that they are going to impose a specific tariff on imports, at the end of the day, it's US consumers that will pay for it. And any other idea that comes to mind, you'll have to review precisely at the end of the day who will be carrying the burden of that decision.
But you're quite clear, and I think you are on record as saying, that if tariffs were imposed, there would be repercussions.
Obviously, because it is obvious that if you impose tariffs on your imports, the country that is being basically aggravated has to analyze and respond in consequence. Now, we don't have to anticipate. We're in a point that we would like to look at this constructively, understanding that there are deep differences in terms of how to view at the key issues like the wall. But we believe that there are ways to really try to work constructively and to really think about a new NAFTA that will benefit the three countries.
So if NAFTA survives, and we must presume that it does, what would the opportunities be for the UK?
If NAFTA survives, and we hope that it does, it will be very interesting to look at a NAFTA agreement with the UK, which will be a very strong agreement because there is a lot of UK investment in Mexico, Canada, and the United States. And it makes a lot of sense to think of this as a way to simplify how North America relates to the United Kingdom.
Do you know, has it been explored, what sort of value that would be to the UK in terms of comparison with the EU? Is it as big a market? Is it a bigger market? What sort of opportunity is there for the UK?
Do you know that obviously the European Union has a value in itself because creating a common market is extremely important. But at the same time, when you are one of the countries that is extremely advanced, UK's service sector is very important. And somehow in a negotiation, the balance out of very vulnerable sectors limits the scope of how you can integrate. I think that regardless of your point of view on Brexit, now is a reality. And the UK has a tremendous advantage on how to do the architecture of agreements that fit you and suit you well in terms of your relevant sectors.
You sound like quite a fan of Brexit.
I'm not. As a matter of fact, what I'm trying to do is make the most of it, because Mexico has had a very, very dynamic open trade policy, and we do highly regard our relationship with the UK.
So the economy minister there, Christian, one thing that I do think is interesting is that we're starting to hear other countries talk about how they can replace trade relationships with the United States effectively with trade relationships between each other. There he is talking about trade relationships with the UK. The Canadians are talking to the Mexicans as well. Is this going to be the future now? People trying to circumvent effectively a protectionist America?
In fact, he told me that very thing, that when Peña Nieto, the president of Mexico, took office, he said to Mr. Guajardo, I want you to diversify our trade portfolio so that we're not as dependent on the United States. So he sent him straight away to the European Union. And of course, now they're looking at Britain, which is pulling away from the European Union, and they see a big opportunity there. And they do see an opportunity there. He is very positive about Brexit, particularly when he talks about the service sector here in the UK, which he says is very valuable to our country. What's also interesting, he's not the first person that's told me about this new, perhaps bigger trade agreement between Canada, the United States, Mexico and Britain. So the 4 countries in a new trading bloc. I don't know what they call it because I think BAFTA's been taken, hasn't it? But it would be, but it's potentially, because they do so much trade between each other at the moment, it is a potential start of that, and that might gather some traction, you would think, in the weeks and months ahead.
Yeah, interesting though, because that's exactly the kind of thing that Mr. Trump doesn't want, are these big multilateral trade agreements for the United States.
That's the flip side, isn't it? Yeah. Well, the US Congress is back in town, and they've quite a list of things to do this week. As we mentioned, tomorrow senators will have that briefing on North Korea, and then we'll also get new proposals on tax reform.
Yeah, but probably the most important thing they have to do is figure out how to fund the government, or else it's going to shut down by the end of this week. A sticking point, of course, is that Mexican wall and exactly who's going to pay for it. A few moments ago, I spoke about it with Republican Congressman Dave Bratt of Virginia. I also asked him how he thinks the 100 days are going. So, Congressman Bratt, let's start with the status of the wall. We had the Mexican economy minister there just saying that there's no way his government is going to pay for it. If Mexico doesn't pay for it, are you prepared to do so? Can Congress pick up the bill?
Yeah, I think so. I don't even think we're talking about a wall. We're just talking about a down payment and a few $1 billion. This was one of the signature issues of the president. And so in most cases, everyone knows the president gets a little leeway in the first year. But not in Washington, D.C., and not in the swamp right now. We own all 3 branches of government now, and it's a $4 trillion budget. And it ends up that our party, the Republican Party, is at the mercy of 8 Senate Democrats. And the American people are just exasperated. That's what Bernie on the left was a symbol of that. Trump on the Republican side was a symbol of that. And so I think we got to plow through this some way. I think President Trump will get burned this one time, but then he'll learn the leverage that he knows so well from New York and learn how to apply that leverage going forward.
Okay, Congressman, you've just come back from your recess break down in Virginia. How do your constituents think the president is doing? How do you think he's doing?
I think he's doing fine. I mean, it's a new environment for him, right? So we got the health care bill. I think we're going to get that out next week. I'm in the Freedom Caucus. The vice president came over. We got to yes with him. The president came over, a very good negotiator. We got to yes on that. The Supreme Court's favorable. The stock market's up. Everybody, the biggest deal, of course, is the tax package. If that goes through, I think you're going to see an economic pop, right? The markets are already forward-looking on that. Back JFK, it's not partisan. JFK did a tax cut similarly, got 5% real GDP growth. Reagan did the same, and you had growth for a decade and a half afterwards. And that's what we need more than, I think that's what the election was about, right? If he gets the jobs going, then he's successful. If we don't have jobs in a couple of years, then the American people are going to judge us.
But actually, up until now, the president has not had a single legislative success.
Well, in 90 days, again, I don't know of too many legislative successes up here. In the past, we've accumulated $20 trillion in debt and put our kids $100 trillion unfunded liabilities. So I'm not aware of any raving success up here. At least he's trying to move the ball in the right direction. Usually we move it in the wrong direction in this city, and we're bankrupt in the country, and we've had 2% economic growth for 8 years, right? So that's, I don't know who's doing good legislation. I'm dying to see some. So I think we're getting on track. Once he figures out the leverage piece, I think we'll be a gold mine.
Okay, Congressman Dave Bratt, thanks very much for joining me.
Great, thanks, Kathy.
Well, Kathy, I got an email today from the White House. I don't often get emails from the White House, but it's got quite a long list of what it considers its historic accomplishments leading up to the 100-day mark. It's a really long list, despite their boss trying to play down the event come the end of the week.
Okay, so here's a question for you, Christian. How is history going to look back at the last few weeks compared to previous American presidents? Joining us now from Austin, Texas, is presidential historian Douglas Brinkley. Mr. Brinkley, you heard Congressman Bratt there just saying that everything is going swimmingly. You've said it couldn't get much worse. Who's right?
Well, it's been a very disastrous first 100 days. There's been no real accomplishment. He pushed through the repeal and replace of the Affordable Care Act, which was going to be the crown jewel of his first term dealing with Congress, and it blew up in his face. He's also had a problem of a Russian election probe kind of hanging over him. He never really has been able to get his footing yet, Donald Trump. So you're looking at 100 days. You know, the reason we do in America the 100 days is Franklin Roosevelt came in and, 15 major pieces of legislation and got the country going. And John F. Kennedy struggled during his 100 days, but he decided to unify the country just weeks after his 100 days with the moonshot, putting the first man on the moon. Donald Trump seems to be kind of having a hangover effect from the 2016 campaign. And the surprise here in America is that his own Republican Party is the one who sunk him on the repeal and replace of the Affordable Care Act.
So give us a sense of historical perspective then. How much should we judge the ultimate success of an American president on these first few months?
I've never been that keen on the 100 days bit, but it's tracking in the 21st century. It's sort of a media term for, doing a quick checkup on how a president's been. Barack Obama got the 100-day test, but he had passed the stimulus package, getting America out of the Great Recession, saving General Motors from going bankrupt, so you could track achievements. Nobody, let's call it 20 years from now, is going to go to the Donald Trump Presidential Library and have kids swoon over the first 100 days. It was just a time of confusion, and the president stepped on his message a lot with his Twitter. The country right now is more ununified than ever, and he never seemed to be able to strike a note to do a handshake across the aisle with the Democrats. The history may see the lost opportunity was not doing jobs, not doing infrastructure, dams, bridges, highways, something that may have been able to pull the country together, at least for the honeymoon season, which the first 100 days usually is.
Mr. Brinkley, is it possible to judge, and not just with this president, but with all presidents, how effective a legislative programme is in 100 days? Because they all try and rush things through to make a point, get some points on the board. And I just wonder if all legislation suffers as a result.
Well, that's a great question, and you said it perfectly. Yes, people try to put points on the board. I'm simply saying Donald Trump didn't put any points on the board. Doesn't mean he won't come fall. But some presidents have successful out-of-the-gate runs. Some don't. I mean, Ronald Reagan was beloved after his first 100 days, but he was shot. And the country kind of pulled for him to heal. So he had very high public approval ratings. So it's a kind of rough barometer, but it's important when you campaign and say, I'm going to build a wall. And day one, Donald Trump said, repeal and replace Obamacare. He had a Republican Senate, Republican Congress. They've got the White House, and they couldn't get the job done. That looks like incompetence, or at very least the inability to tally votes properly before you put all your chips on something that goes that haywire.
Okay, Douglas Brinkley, presidential historian, thanks so much for joining us from Austin. Christian, Donald Trump has often used his daughter Ivanka, we've talked about this before, as a surrogate. She attends events, defends his record. That was her mission today at a G20 summit in Berlin.
Yeah, but from what I saw, it didn't really go down so well with the crowd. Ivanka sat alongside the German Chancellor Angela Merkel and the IMF chief Christine Lagarde, so some big figures there. And she was defending her father's record on women and families, at which point this is the reaction from the audience.
He's been a tremendous champion of supporting families and enabling them to thrive in the new reality of
you hear the reaction from the audience, so I need to address one more point. Some attitudes towards women your father has publicly displayed in former times might leave one questioning whether he's such an empowerer for women. How do you relate to that?
I think the thousands of women who have worked with and for my father for decades when he was in the private sector are a testament to his belief and solid conviction in the potential of women and their ability to do the job as well as any man.
What do you make of that?
Good, wasn't she? I mean, she's an impressive speaker on a public stage,
Yeah,
I
very
think,
impressive.
and she does make a case for her father. His record is mixed, though. I looked it up, Christian. He has passed an executive order, bills actually, to try and get more women into science, but he's revoked a fair pay order that helped women. And of course, early on, he signed that executive order which stopped federal funds for international groups that perform or advise on abortion. So women's groups are saying it's a mixed record at the moment.
And some would look at, you know, what he's done since he came into office, the International Reproductive Fund, which he cut, which is crucial. We've focused on women in Africa. That hardly empowers women in Africa when they don't have control over reproductive rights and that sort of thing, and some people might point to that. I mean, just separate to that, what about Angela Merkel inviting her, as we presume she has, to Berlin?
Yeah, well, they're trying to make the point, all of them, and there's a lot of data on this. I think we can show some of it, that there are so many global studies now that show that companies that employ more women actually make more money. These have been done by Columbia, the IMF, Goldman Sachs. They've all done these studies now. And I think that was the point of this gathering. But it got a little bit hijacked by the politics of Donald Trump. I think we're living in that kind of era, aren't we, Christian, where you know, you try and talk about issues and Donald Trump comes into the picture, and that's actually what Ivanka Trump found out in Berlin today. Yeah,
but not a bad channel for Angela Merkel to open up. If she's got a route into the White House, that must be a good thing. You're watching 100 Days from BBC News.
Still to come for viewers on the BBC News Channel and BBC World News. Now it's down to 2. Who will the supporters of the ousted presidential candidates now cast their votes for? We've some new polls. We'll share those with you.
And a post promoting President Trump's Florida resort find its way onto the State Department website. Should it have been there in the first place? We'll talk about it on 100 Days for BBC News.
Hello there, good evening. Quite a mixed bag of weather across the UK earlier on today. In northern Scotland, it was like we jumped back a few months into the middle of winter with some widespread snow. We even saw some snow further south in Staffordshire. It's lying on the cars and on the roofs, but a little bit of sunshine here as well, and sunny spells and some rain showers in Dudley. So yes, a real mixed bag. We started on a pretty decent note actually with some spells of sunshine, but shower clouds developed quite widely and spread their way south on that cold wind coming down from a long way north. So yes, it's another cold night ahead. A frosty night for many of us, and we are not done with those wintry showers just yet. Next few hours, there's a good crop of them across much of England and Wales. They tend to fade away from western areas. We'll keep a few going, particularly along that eastern coast where it stays quite windy. But it's further west where the skies are clearer and the winds are a bit lighter. That's where we're expecting the lowest temperatures. The blue tinge indicates a fairly widespread frost. Even in major town cities, we're only a degree or 2 above freezing, so rural spots will be a good few degrees below. So it's a cold start across the south and west of the UK, but a lot of sunshine, just the odd shower clipping the tip of Cornwall, maybe the tip of Pembrokeshire as well. A bit more cloud for the Midlands and eastern areas generally, and there are those showers East Anglia, Lincolnshire, up into Yorkshire, a bit wintry up over higher ground. But the northwest of England, Northern Ireland, much of Scotland, it's a cold but a bright start with a good deal of sunshine, although there's always more cloud in the northwest with 1 or 2 early showers. But the main focus for showers through Wednesday will be central and eastern parts of England. Again, 1 or 2 of those can be heavy with a few rumbles of thunder, some hail mixed in. Showers are fewer and further between across these western areas. So a pretty reasonable day with some good spells of sunshine. Scotland, Northern Ireland, only 8 or 9 degrees, 11 or 12 for Cardiff and for London. Through the evening, still some showers for the first part of the evening, but they tend to become fewer and further between before eventually fading away. But a cloud is gathering in the north and west with some outbreaks of rain. That'll be a feature of things as you get on into Thursday. It's a fairly weak weather front slipping south, bringing a fair bit of cloud and some rain with it. But behind that, we've also got some slightly less cold or even milder air. Temperatures probably rising by a degree or so across England and Wales. The effects of this will be much more noticeable in Scotland and Northern Ireland, because temperatures here should get up by a good 2 or 3 degrees. There's that cloud and patchy rain for England and Wales. It dries up in Scotland and Northern Ireland, Glasgow and Belfast up to 11 or 12 degrees.
Two outstanding art historians tour 3 incredible cities to give you an insider's guide to the cultural highlights.
What an assault on the senses.
And discover hidden treasures off the beaten track.
The beauty and the artistry of it makes it an incredible piece of medieval sculpture.
I've really entered the territory of the hunchback of Oude Kerk. I've lost all sense of direction on this map.
An art lover's guide, coming soon on BBC 4.
What do our pets need to be healthy? They can't tell you, but science can. Our crack team of experts use pioneering research to bring you the very best advice, from the best way to treat fleas to how to help your pet lose weight. Trust me, I'm a vet. Starts Wednesday, 3rd of May on BBC 2.
Ladies and gentlemen, the next president of the United States, Donald Trump.
Britain has voted to end its membership of the European Union.
The Tory party have confirmed Theresa May will be the next Prime Minister.
These men are the first government forces to enter the city of Mosul.
So they are saying yes, unlawful killing.
That is an absolutely huge development in this story.
The BBC has been given unprecedented access inside a British jail.
The capsule is down. Great to see you looking so well. It's great to be back.
Welcome back to 100 Days. I'm Katty Kay in Washington. Christian Fraser is in London.
Our top story. As a missile-armed American submarine arrives in South Korea, a former US ambassador to the UN tells us that there's no bigger concern for President Trump.
This is the biggest foreign policy challenge for the new president, more than Syria, more than the Middle East.
And the UK's opposition Labour Party clarifies their position on Brexit.
The French President François Hollande has called for unity in the long, difficult fight against terrorism. He made those remarks at a public memorial for the police officer Xavier Jugelet, who was shot dead on the Champs-Élysées in Paris last week, in fact 500 metres from where we were broadcasting at the time.
Two candidates, Emmanuel Macron, Marine Le Pen, they also attended that ceremony. On policy, Mr Macron is an advocate of open borders and he's urged people not to give in to fear. Ms Le Pen, however, wants France to reintroduce border controls and to deport all foreigners who are on the terror watch list. Christian, to what extent was this, when you left Paris yesterday, to what extent was this playing into the final round of the election?
I think terror will come into the debate quite strongly next week when they sit down for this televised debate on Wednesday. The interesting thing, actually, last night is that Marine Le Pen stood away from the Front National. She stood down as the political...
Yeah, why did she do that?
Well, I can see why she's done it. I think the problem for her is that she's synonymous with the FN brand. The Le Pen name is synonymous with the FN. But what she's trying to do is she's trying to stand as the presidential candidate rather than the FN candidate. And I want to show you why. I was looking at some poll figures last night. These are poll figures that EFOP, one of the polling agencies, had done for Paris Match. And they're looking at where the supporters are going from the other camps. Particularly take a look at the Mélenchon vote for a second. So here is where Mélenchon voters would go. 51% to Macron, just 19% to Le Pen. And when you strip away terrorism and security, the economic platform, if you will, of Mélenchon and Le Pen is virtually the same. It's anti-globalisation,
right, just
anti-capitalism.
Distancing herself from the name of the party, Christian, is that going to do it? Do you think she can really pick up a big chunk of those?
Yeah, I think she's going to say, look, forget the FN. I'm in line with your anti-capitalist, anti-globalist, nationalist economy sort of view of life. You're voting for Mélenchon for those reasons, but you're not voting for me because you don't like the FN brand. The same is true for Fillon supporters. So if you look at Fillon supporters, a third of them will go to Marine Le Pen. That's the Roman Catholic vote. 41%. So more of the right going for the centre, Macron, than going for Le Pen. And that's what she's trying to do. She's trying to say, I am the mother of the nation. I will bring back, you know, nationalism to France. I'll get rid of the elite that have performed so badly over the course of the last 10 years. And Mr Macron, he is more of the same. So vote for me. Don't necessarily vote for the FM, but vote for me.
It's fascinating. It'll be very interesting to see whether just making that move of taking herself out of the party actually persuades voters that she's Marine Le Pen and not the National Front anymore. OK, let's move on to the British election. Today, Theresa May took the UK general election campaign to Wales, a Labour stronghold, where she said this election is about giving her a clear mandate through the Brexit talks.
Every single vote for me and the local Conservative candidate will be a vote for a stronger Wales, for a stronger United Kingdom, and as I say, will strengthen my hand in those important Brexit negotiations. And a vote for any other party would be a vote for a weak and failing Jeremy Corbyn, propped up by a coalition of chaos which would risk our national future.
But on the Labour side today, they were clarifying their position on Brexit. The shadow Brexit secretary, Sir Keir Starmer, said Labour accepted that free movement of people could not continue, but he suggested EU nationals could still be allowed in if they had a guaranteed job offer, while taking aim at the Prime Minister.
If Theresa May gets another 5 years in power, she will take it as a green light to sideline Parliament, ignore opposition and drive through a reckless Tory Brexit.
Well, joining us from Westminster is the BBC's Eleanor Garnier. Let me pick up that quote from Keir Starmer, Eleanor. People with a guaranteed job offer could come to the UK. Are we saying could or will?
I think we're saying should, if that helps at all. What Sir Keir was saying today was that he understands and that Labour understands that with the current membership of the single market, it would mean freedom of movement would have to end. But he's saying that we need an immigration system that works for the economy. So there needs to be movement of people into the UK to support businesses. So if you've got a job offer, then yes, you can come here. Now, how that's managed in terms of permits and work visas, well, he said that is still something that would need to be sorted out. But he says the last thing we want is for our businesses here to go bankrupt. So Sir Keir's view, and he said it was the whole of the shadow cabinet's view too, that's the top team of the opposition party here. He said it was their view that those with work permits could come over here. Now, I think it's to be seen whether the whole of the shadow cabinet are signed up to that position. But that is how he put it today.
OK, Eleanor, we've been saying a couple of times during the programme that Labour's just clarified its position on Brexit. I'd love to know whether you agree with that, but also whether, what are we up to now? We're edging up towards 500,000 new registered voters. If those voters, some of them, want to take a stand against Brexit still, do they have any other clear option other than the Liberal Democrats?
I think that's certainly what the Lib Dems want to hear, that they are the only, excuse me, pro-European party out there that are there for young people especially to look to. But I think what Labour needs to do and what they tried to do today is show they are pro-European, that they are flexible too when it comes to the negotiations. Now, the issue of Brexit has been huge for weeks and weeks, months. I don't need to tell you that. And I think it's come to just weeks before a general election, and Labour is trying once again to clarify its position. The referendum was almost a month ago, so it's a very difficult task for Sir Keir and Labour to do when we are so close to an election. And remember, when the Prime Minister, Theresa May, is putting out a very clear message. She's saying no to the single market, no to the customs union, no to freedom of movement, and no to the European Court of Justice. So I think unless Labour does manage to put this issue of Brexit to bed, it is not going to get a hearing on the issues it wants to talk about, like the NHS, like being an anti-austerity party, like social care. Unless it manages to draw a line under the issue of Brexit and present something that is palatable and clear to the electorate, it is not going to get traction on those other issues. And I think it has left it very late in the day to convince the voters that it does know what it's talking about when it comes to Brexit.
OK, Eleanor, thanks very much. Doesn't sound to me like you are convinced that the clarity issue has been resolved. Eleanor, thanks very much. On Monday night, Christian, Arkansas carried out back-to-back executions, becoming the first American state to put more than one inmate to death on the same day in 17 years.
The deaths came after numerous court challenges and as the state races to use a part of the 3-drug protocol before it expires. The BBC's Aleem Makboul has covered this story extensively, and he's with us with all the latest. I did read this morning, Aleem, that there were a number of stays of execution, but eventually 2 executed on the same night.
Yeah, it was an extraordinary evening. There's been so much drama around these executions, but as you rightly say, this all started because Arkansas wanted these 8 executions to happen in 10 days because one of the drugs expires at the end of this month. Now, some of the legal action to hold off these executions was about how effective this drug was, because there have been several cases around this country where this lethal injection cocktail has not worked. There's been, in one case a couple of years ago in Arizona, a man took nearly 2 hours to die. In another case in Oklahoma, a man took 43 minutes. Now, yesterday, it looked like the first execution of a man named Jack Jones, a convicted rapist and murderer, had passed off okay. I mean, he came into the chamber, it took him apparently 14 minutes to die. But then when the second man was brought in, he was in the execution chamber, he was on the padded bed, and suddenly at that point he was told there was a stay of execution because there had been problems with the first execution, according to lawyers.
OK, you've been down in Arkansas covering this story. I know that our viewers around the world, particularly in countries that don't have the death penalty, will look at this and just think it's barbaric, what's happening in that state. So many executions happening so fast because of a drug that's about to expire. But what's interesting as well is that the drug companies are distancing themselves from what Arkansas is doing. What's happening there?
That is why I think it's going to become even more difficult for states to actually put people to death. I mean, not only was that action about the fact that there is suffering involved for some of these people, but now drug companies are saying we don't want to sell these drugs to states anymore because now we know what they're used for. They were sold to these states on a medicinal basis because they were going to be used for therapeutic use. Now they've found out what they're used for. They don't want to sell them anymore. There were stays of execution on that basis, but in the end, the Supreme Court, the US Supreme Court, ruled that the executions could go ahead. But that's why Arkansas had this problem, because after this drug runs out, they don't know where they're going to get it from.
OK, Alim Mabul, thanks very much. The United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has warned the international community that an entire generation of children in Yemen is being starved and crippled because of the war there. The UN has described the situation as the world's largest humanitarian crisis, with around 3/4 of the population in need of assistance.
Sir Elton John is recovering at home after cancelling a series of shows in America due to what's been described as a potentially deadly bacterial infection. Sir Elton, who's 70, fell ill while on tour in Chile earlier this month.
Well, the President, Christian, calls his Mar-a-Lago resort in Florida his winter White House. We've spoken about this before, but of course he shares it with his paying guests. It is part of the Trump business empire, and the fees have gone up since he became president. Every time he stays there, his brand gets more valuable publicity.
Yeah, and what if the federal government was also marketing the President's hotel? Well, that's exactly what happened. The US State Department was forced to react quickly this week to criticism of a blog on its website that was promoting Mr. Trump's Florida estate. And what's more, several American embassies republished it.
We did try to take a look at that blog on the US Embassy's UK page, and this is what now comes up. Yes, the State Department has taken it down, saying that it regrets any misperception. The White House, by the way, Christian, is saying that they had no idea that this blog was going to go up. This was not their attempt to try and market the Trump properties. It was something that the State Department has said it did to try and promote history and culture and the historical building of Mar-a-Lago. OK, we'll let them off. Shall we do some selfless marketing of our own and tell our viewers that we're going to be carrying on after 100 days? We've actually got a special programme on Friday. It's 99 days on Friday, isn't it, Cathy? Yeah, we're not actually going to be here on Saturday, right? No, day off. Tell me that. Day off. But we will be here on the Monday with 100 Days Plus, and we hope that you're going to join us for that. And we hope you'll be with us tomorrow as well, because we will be back at the same time tomorrow. From me, Christian Fraser in London, and Cathy Kay in Washington, thanks for watching.